Okay, people, how we doing? Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear in the chat. Obviously, this is the second channel, so not as many subscribers, but if you can all stick a like on the video, it really helps. I'm trying to do a lot more content on this channel, try to get it monetized. Shout out to MT. He says, Hatman, have you seen the article about Turkey setting up a boxing league? Yeah, that's an old story though, right? That story is from about 2 months ago or 3 months ago. Unless there's been a new article giving more details about the boxing league. Is that what you mean? If so, which website did you read the article on? Shout out to Andrew. Shout out to JDM. Michael Ortega. Nuril says, Hatman, do you still plan to do Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer animated voiceover? I was never going to do an animated version. I was going to do, or I still am going to do, an audio play. But it's going to take a long time to put that together. I don't know why people always ask me, am I streaming on the wrong channel? No, I've got 2 channels for a reason. So if you ever find me streaming on this channel, it's never a mistake. It's always on purpose. Wave says, is Ben Shalom being bullied by Bricktop? Well, definitely. Big up Triple R. Okay, T-Todd or Ty-Todd, he says, good evening, Hatman. Do you know or what do you think about my fellow Italian, Diego Lenzi? I believe he got to 5th place in the 2024 Olympics in the super heavyweight. No, I don't know about him. The last Italian heavyweight that I really paid attention to was Roberto Camarel, who was obviously a very, very good super heavyweight in the amateurs for a long time. Not sure why he didn't turn pro, because he was very talented. Big up S.A. Andrew says, Ben being bullied by a Bricktop and Eddie getting spanked by Turkey. Indeed. All right, so what I want to talk about here is really to give you guys some recommendations, just briefly. Some fights. I've put together a playlist. Let me just get the playlist. Well, on my channel page, you'll see it there. If you select the playlist tab, I've done a playlist called OG Fights. And I'm going to keep adding to this particular playlist. I've only just, started compiling it. And so I'm going to show you some of the fights that are on there. Now, I'm trying not to put obvious great fights from back in the days, but fights that are maybe flying under the radar a little bit more, because the fighters, in some instances anyway, are not that famous, although some of them are, as you'll see when I go through some of these fights. But yeah, the theme of it is to put fights on the playlist that mainstream boxing fans or newer boxing fans might not be familiar with. So let's start off here with Frankie Lyles versus Tim Littles. Their first fight was a 12-rounder, like it went 12 rounds. Their rematch was actually in the UK, and there was no indication that it would be, much different from the first fight, but it turned out to be a crazy slugfest between 2 boxers. Tim Littles and Frankie Lyles were both slicksters. Neither one of them, well, Tim Littles was in some punch-ups, Frankie Lyles here and there as well, but for the most part, they were slicksters. But somehow, and for some reason, in their rematch, they went hell for leather. I don't know what that was all about, but they were very, very angry with each other. In fact, I want to say that, unless it's me imagining things, because, it's a long time ago, this fight was in the 1990s, I swear somebody said that there was an issue between them over a girl. Don't quote me on that. But I feel like I might have heard that somewhere. If that is the case, it would explain why the fight was so ferocious compared to the first fight. It was crazy. And as you can see, if you look at the the time at the bottom of the video there, it's 16 minutes, 50 seconds long, the entire video. So, the fight doesn't go the distance, needless to say. So definitely check that one out. Again, just go to the playlist tab on this channel and you'll see the playlist there. If you guys want some late night boxing to watch, some slugfest and dramatic fights. Next one here is Carl Thompson versus Ezra Sellers. Unfortunately, it isn't in one part. It's in two parts. But again, they're both on the playlist. This is one of the wildest cruiserweight fights you'll see. Loads of knockdowns, a brutal knockout ending. Carl Thompson, who fought the likes of David Haye, remember, said that Ezra Sellers was the hardest puncher he ever fought in his whole life. He said he could not believe how hard Ezra Sellers could hit. Ezra Sellers also had a fantastic rivalry with Alex Stewart, who fought Mike Tyson and also fought George Foreman and Evander Holyfield. Alex Stewart was actually born in the UK. I think he was born in maybe Dulwich. I want to say it was South London. I could be wrong, but he was definitely born in London. Actually, was he born in London or Jamaica? I think he was born in London, but he's of Jamaican heritage. But he based himself in his pro career as a boxer in the United States. And I think he married an American woman. But anyway, he had a vicious rivalry with Ezra Sellers as well. But this fight here, Ezra Sellers versus Carl Thompson, must watch. Ezra Sellers a tremendous puncher. Carl Thompson a very good puncher himself. So if you want to see a bunch of knockdowns, yeah, check that one out. Next one here is, again, a little bit of a classic, which maybe some newer boxing fans aren't too familiar with. Michael Moorer versus Burt Cooper. Burt Cooper was a cruiserweight contender. He was actually, at one point, mandatory for Evander Holyfield at cruiserweight, but Holyfield couldn't make the cruiserweight limit anymore, so he vacated and moved up to heavyweight. They, of course, fought years later when Holyfield was heavyweight champion, undisputed heavyweight champion. Burt Cooper stepped in as a literally last-minute replacement because originally Holyfield was supposed to fight Mike Tyson on that particular show, which was at the Omni Center in Atlanta, Georgia. But Mike Tyson caught a case. We all know for what. Caught that case, went to prison, so that left Holyfield with no opponent. So they tried to replace Mike Tyson with Francesco Damiani, and that looked like he was going to go ahead. But then Damiani pulled out with very, very little time left, maybe a week or two. And so in stepped Burt Cooper. And Burt Cooper gave Evander Holyfield absolute hell. Right? Absolute hell. Gave him the first count that he'd had in his career. Holyfield didn't manage to do something which Michael Moorer did do, which was to drop Burt Cooper. Burt Cooper, by the time he fought Holyfield, was really a journeyman. And, same goes for when he fought Michael Moorer, but he was a journeyman that had a tremendous punch. He could really, really whack. At one stage, he was actually trained to some extent. I don't know how involved this guy was, but he had some type of involvement in the training of Burt Cooper, and that was Joe Frazier. That's why Burt Cooper took the name Smoking, because obviously Joe Frazier's nickname was Smoking Joe Frazier. Burt Cooper, I think, asked permission from Joe Frazier or something like that to use his nickname. Not like he had to, but he did it anyway out of respect and because he knew him. And I guess, Joe Frazier had some involvement training him. So yeah, he was a tremendous puncher, Burt Cooper, but didn't have much of a chin. Quit in many fights over the years. But this fight right here, Michael Moorer versus Burt Cooper, absolute must-watch heavyweight slugfest. Right? Michael Moorer, very good southpaw fight. You can see Moorer there was still trained by Manny Stewart. He had the Kronk gold trunks on, the famous Kronk gold trunks. You don't see enough of them these days, sadly. But yeah, back in the days, they were familiar trunks. And whenever you saw a guy wearing those trunks, you knew that he had some skills. You knew that he had some ability. more often than not anyway. And so, yeah, Michael Moorer and Burt Cooper wasted no time, started trading knockdowns, and it was a wild fight. So definitely check out Michael Moorer versus Burt Cooper. And speaking of wild fights, here's another one. Riddick Bowe versus Andrew Golota 2. This is an absolute must watch. You have to watch this fight. Seriously, this should be compulsory for any boxing fan. The first fight was good and it was surprising because Andrew Golota was kind of a dark horse. I'd seen him on the come up fighting people like Samson Pujar. I'd seen him fight on the Lennox Lewis, Phil Jackson undercard. But for some reason, the American boxing fraternity still didn't take Eastern European fighters, Eastern European heavyweights specifically, seriously. At this stage, they were still kind of dismissing them as pros. They knew that they were good in the amateurs, but as professional fighters, they were dismissing them. So Andrew Golota, for that reason, kind of came in under the radar. Riddick Bowe was supposed to, this was what the narrative and what the script was, he was supposed to go in there and just do a job on Andrew Golota, dust him off in a couple of rounds and then move on to a big showdown with Lennox Lewis. But of course, Andrew Golota had other plans. He pieced up Riddick Bowe in their first fight. But Golota was crazy and he got himself disqualified for repeatedly punching Riddick Bowe very low. And that kicked off a full-scale riot in Madison Square Garden. Full-scale riot between Bowe's fans and Golota's fans, where people were getting hit with chairs, knocked out all over the place. You go watch that on YouTube, the first Bowe-Golota fight. So they had an immediate rematch. Riddick Bowe lost a load of weight, thought he was in much better shape, but to me, he looked weaker in the second fight, although his spirit was very, very strong, and it was incredibly wild. Yeah. If you ain't seen this second fight, trust me, it's worth watching. The exchanges are vicious, knockdowns, controversy, an absolute must-watch classic heavyweight slugfest from 1996. All right, do not miss Riddick Bowe versus Andrew Golota 2. So check it out. I've already talked about this next fight, so we're not going to stay on it for too long, but Holyfield versus Burt Cooper. This was a prime Evander Holyfield fighting in front of his hometown crowd, or his adopted hometown. He's originally from Alabama, but during his pro career, he based himself in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where this fight took place. So this was a prime Holyfield. The trouble he ended up having with Burt Cooper, a guy who is basically like a knockoff Mike Tyson. I mean, probably unfair to call him a knockoff Mike Tyson because his style was more similar to Joe Frazier. As I said, he was kind of trained by Joe Frazier at one point, or assisted in his training by Joe Frazier. And yeah, stylistically, he was a bit more similar to Frazier, but a lot of heavyweights back in the late 80s and through the 90s brought Burt Cooper into their camp when they were going to fight Mike Tyson. They brought him in for sparring. So anyway, the way this fight turned out between Holyfield and Cooper made a lot of people, including myself, think that Holyfield would have absolutely no chance against Mike Tyson whatsoever. Do you know what I mean? You're struggling with a guy like Burt Cooper, who's a journeyman. You're going life and death with him. How on earth are you going to have any chance against Iron Mike? So when Tyson came out of prison, I just dropped a video actually on Patreon about the lead up, the build up to the first Holyfield-Tyson fight, going through several of the fights that they had in the run-up to that particular contest, and why most of us didn't see an upset coming. So if you're not yet on Patreon, make sure you sign up and check that video out. It's like 2 hours long or something. And so, yeah, this was one of the fights which convinced me and most other people that Mike Tyson would just blast right through Evander Holyfield. Do you know what I mean? As brave as Holyfield was, If Burt Cooper's giving you all sorts of problems and putting you on the floor and hurting you, then you don't even want to know what Mike Tyson would do to you. But obviously, Evander Holyfield knew better. But yeah, check out Evander Holyfield, Burt Cooper. You see the best and the worst of Holyfield in this fight. You see great balance, tremendous combination punching. I mean, Holyfield at this stage of his career was much faster and sharper than he was when he fought Mike Tyson years later. I think he was about 34 when he fought Mike Tyson. Here he was like 28. And you'll see a noticeable difference in hand speed and overall mobility between this version of Holyfield and the one that fought Tyson years later. This version of Holyfield is so much faster, beautiful combination puncher, the balance, the punch variety, very, very impressive. But also the leaky defense, which Holyfield had throughout his career. I mean, when he concentrated on tightening up his defense, he could do it. But Holyfield was so attack-minded, he liked exchanging, that he would get himself caught often. Anyway, moving on to the next fight here. Derek Jefferson versus Maurice Harris. Two obscure heavyweights from the 1990s. Both guys had ability. Maurice Harris, particularly as a boxer, and he could also bang a bit. Derek Jefferson, really a brawler with a massive left hook. You know, the interesting thing about Maurice Harris is, in the past, I've talked about gym fighters, fighters who are tremendously talented and perform very well behind closed doors in the gym, but they can't translate, they can't transfer their gym form into the professional prize fighting ring for some weird reason. And apparently Maurice Harris was one of those guys. Manny Stewart was singing Maurice Harris's praises for years. Go look up the interviews online. He said Maurice Harris was an incredible fighter in the gym, but whenever he would get in a pro ring, he'd just fall apart somehow. And Mike Tyson also was singing Maurice Harris's praises. He said Maurice Harris beat the living daylights out of him for weeks in sparring. This would have been in the 1990s. Mike Tyson admitted it himself that Maurice Harris was kicking his butt every day in the gym. Somehow, right? Kicking Mike Tyson's butt every day in the gym. But when he got in a, as I say, pro ring, he just couldn't replicate that kind of form. Maurice Harris was always a little chinny. He was athletic, fast, as I say, decent punching power, but always a bit suspect around the whiskers. And he was a journeyman, really. If you look at his record, he's got a journeyman record. But yeah, his fight here with Derek Jefferson was a slugfest, in spots at least, and it ended with a dramatic knockout. So you've definitely got to watch it. It's one of them ones where one guy gets hurt and you think he's out, and then the other guy comes back and lands a huge shot. So if you haven't seen it before, you'll definitely appreciate the KO. As you can see from the video title on screen, 1999 KO of the year, Derek Jefferson versus Maurice Harris. Check it out. All right, and finally, the final video that I've got on the playlist at the moment, as I say, I'm going to keep adding to this playlist, is Ray Mancini versus Arturo Frias. Ray Mancini with the 1980s curly perm. And Arturo Frias looking like a young Dustin Hoffman. And the referee in the middle looking like God knows what. Looking like the Black Pennywise. I don't know. It was crazy. But yeah, this is a mad fight. A 1-round fight. Which goes, it's a seesaw battle. And Ray Mancini used to do commentary for PBC. PBC do so few shows now that I don't even know whether to say that Ray Mancini still does commentary for PBC. He's obviously an old guy now. And many people wouldn't have realized that he boxed or known much about his boxing career. I'm talking about newer boxing fans. But if you want to know what Ray Mancini was like, go watch his fight against Arturo Frias. Wild slugfest, which doesn't even go around. Okay, all sorts of punches are thrown. You know, both guys getting staggered. Yeah, definitely a must watch. All right, so that is the playlist I've put together there. Make sure you guys check it out. I'll get to the comments here. All right. Triple R says last episode of Confessions was left on a cliffhanger. Surely it will be fixed in the remaster. Was it? The last episode was left on a cliffhanger. No, I did so many episodes. I don't think it was left on a cliffhanger, was it? Because the final few episodes of Confessions was when I was talking about my days as a security guard. Because obviously most of Confessions is when I was a bouncer. And then I did some episodes about when I was doing retail security. But yeah, I'm looking to remake it as an audio play. So it'll be like a movie for your ears with sound effects and different voices and, you know, all that kind of thing. But it will take a long time to do. It's a lot of work. Triple R says, I remember you saying the Battle of Brixton was a classic. Was it Danny Williams against some guy for the British title back in the day? I still ain't seen it. Yeah, that was Danny Williams versus Keith Long for the British heavyweight title. Unfortunately, it's not on YouTube anywhere. The last time I saw that fight, there was some guy that was uploading full fights to his Facebook page. And he had like hundreds of fights uploaded directly to his Facebook page or his Facebook group. But I'm not on Facebook. I ain't been on Facebook for several years. But that was the last time I saw that fight. It was on somebody's Facebook page. And yeah, a tremendous fight between Danny Williams and Keith Long. I mean, the way those guys were swinging at each other, you'd think they had beef over a woman. I always tell people, never fight over a woman, man. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. But then again, if you're going to get paid for it, that might be the only time when I tell you to make the exception. Telstar says Holyfield combinations in the first round did look phenomenal in the first round of the Cooper fight. Yeah, and all the way through the fight, actually. Apart from the round, in fact, even in the round where he gets hurt, he comes back with phenomenal combinations. Like really impressive combination punching. Telstar96 says, Hatman, don't know if you've seen before, but Vintage Boxing TM has one of the best archives of HD quality fights from the 70s to the 90s. I've probably seen it because I watch so many old school retro fights. And, you know, I always, whenever I'm looking up a fight, I always want the best quality one. So I don't just like click the first result at the top. Unless it's really good quality, usually it isn't. So I'll scroll through and I'll often click on many, many different videos, you know, of the same fight, looking for the best quality one. So I'm sure I've come across his channel at some point. There's another good channel called Mario Sanchez. He's actually subscribed to my main channel on YouTube. He sometimes leaves comments. He's got a great channel and his videos are really high quality. Like, you know, the visual quality, the fidelity is really good on Mario Sanchez's videos, and he uploads in 60 frames per second as well, which is very unusual for fights back in the, you know, 80s and 90s. So definitely check out Mario Sanchez. He doesn't have the most extensive catalog of fights on there, although some of them might have been removed due to copyright claims and whatever, but he's got a decent catalog on there. And as I say, they tend to be better visual quality than most other channels. So yeah, check out Mario Sanchez. Shout out to Ortega. Shout out to Chili Beef. He said, word Hatman, I'm looking forward to watching the new Patreon video. Always top tier stuff. Yes, big up Chili Beef every time. Solid Snake says, Frias nose has seen better days. Indeed. He's got a nose like, what's that YouTuber called? In fact, two YouTubers, Anderson Gibb and Slim, their noses are crazy. It's mad that two guys with crazy noses like that actually fought each other. But I think Slim has an even crazier nose than Anderson Gibb. And yeah, Slim's nose is probably something like Frias's nose. But Frias did look like a young Dustin Hoffman. If you go watch that fight with Ray Mancini, yeah, you'll see that look like a young Dustin Hoffman. You know, like when Dustin Hoffman was in Rain Man? Something like that. Waved says, did you see Devin Haney doing a public workout at Peacock's gym today at 2 p.m.? Yeah, I saw a little bit of it with Tunde. And yes, I've been Peacock gym in Canning Town. Ortega says, Hatman, would you go for a Chinese with Big John Fisher? Definitely not. I wouldn't want to go anywhere near Big John Fisher, to be honest. I mean, the size he is, how could he possibly wash himself properly? Do you know what I mean? Not to be graphic, but I mean, you'd literally need about 3 people with a fire hose to wash Big John Fisher. To actually wash him properly. It's grim stuff. TM says, Keith Long is a cool guy. He used to work in Miguel's. He did indeed. Wasn't the biggest heavyweight, but held his own at that level. Yeah, he used to be down Miguel's a lot. He used to train there. JDM says, if Gibb and Slim stood back to back, it would resemble a pickaxe. LaFez says, Big John Fisher needs to lose some weight. Well, that's an understatement if ever I heard one. I mean, he is eating himself into the grave. And people are cheering him on, bizarrely. Very strange. Peter Tavendale says, BMP is rife tonight. Okay. Jimbo Jones says, who wins, Razor Ruddock or AJ? AJ. Yeah, I think AJ in his prime would beat Razor Ruddock. Razor Ruddock could punch and he was somewhat fast, but his defense was terribly leaky. You know, he got dropped plenty of times in his career, stopped in his career. I'd take AJ in that fight. I think AJ is just a bit technically better and a bit more versatile. Ortega says, Hatman, have you seen the new Gladiator? If so, what do you think? I haven't seen it. I wouldn't watch it. I don't think Ridley Scott is a very good director. He made a couple of good films in Alien, the first Gladiator, and Blade Runner. Other than that, most of his films, in my opinion, are, average at best. And when you see these guys trying to revive an old franchise from 20 years ago or 25 years ago, it's usually a desperation move. So, no, I was never interested in watching the Gladiator sequel. No need for the sequel. And from what I've heard, it got panned by most people anyway. The Zombie Dome says, John Fisher put it on Gareth A. Davis after the Dave Allen robbery. Yeah, he did. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. And Gareth A. Davis uncharacteristically actually fought back. Because normally when somebody puts it on him, he just melts. But with Big John Fisher, he started giving it back. And I think the reason for it is because Gareth A. Davis probably don't think that Johnny Fisher Jr. is actually going anywhere after struggling with Dave Allen. See, that's what Gareth A. Davis is like. He's like one of these guys that tries to latch on to whoever he thinks is going to be successful. You know, like a Glory supporter? He'll latch on to them and start kissing their butt and never criticizing them and defending them at every turn, so on and so forth, like he's done with Tyson Fury. No matter what Tyson Fury did, he would never criticize him for anything. And that's what Gareth A. Davis is like. If he thinks you're good, if he thinks you're going somewhere, he'll start sucking up to you. But because Johnny Fisher nearly lost to Dave Allen, and in the eyes of most people did lose, That's why Gareth A. Davis is like, I don't care about criticizing this guy. And that's what it was. That's what it was. Jelly Mold says, Fisher really showed his level against Allen, totally halted the hype train. Yeah, I was kind of surprised that there ever was a hype train to begin with. But, you know, Eddie Hearn's from Essex. He understands the psychology of Essex people. And obviously Johnny Fisher's from Essex, so he knew exactly what to do as far as marketing the guy in that part of the world. So he did a good job in that, selling tickets and whatnot. But ever since I first saw Johnny Fisher, yeah, he's a big, strong lad. He's got a bit of hand speed there and he can obviously punch. But technically, he's so poor. He's so like novice-y, not even amateurish, novice-y. Like somebody that's having their first few amateur fights. That's the way that Johnny Fisher boxes. And of course, he only had a handful of amateur bouts. Started boxing when he was in uni. Bear in mind, I think he's only about 26 now. So he's only a couple years removed from uni. So yeah, he's only been boxing since yesterday, basically. So he's very, very technically raw. It's going to take years of development before you put him near anyone with a pulse. And I was saying that obviously long before the Dave Allen fight. I didn't think Dave Allen would be somebody with a pulse, truth be told. I didn't think Dave Allen would turn up with much ambition because he hasn't turned up with ambition for any fight for a long time. I mean, the Fraser Clark performance was very poor. Quit on his stool. Shout out to G-Man in the chat. JDM says, I must have been the only person that noticed Johnny's newfound acne rash wasn't there in the fight before Allen. I can't say I noticed that myself. I'll have to have a look. Solid Snake says, the only time I've ever sided with Gad. Ortega says, what's the best fight on the February 22nd card? Any underdogs who got the best chance in the seven fights on the card? I'll come on to that in a second. G-Man says, Hearn, for all his flaws, he was able to get people to think Fisher versus Atama was competitive. I know. You know, I would, especially on Instagram, I would see posts on Instagram about Atama and Fisher, and there'd be loads of people in the comments saying, oh, they need to make the Atama-Fisher fight now. And I was like, why do you want to watch a mismatch? You know, I don't mind watching Johnny Fisher as long as they match him appropriately. But putting him in there against the Talma, that's like a blowout for a Talma. That's not a competitive fight. Certainly not yet. Big up the Joker. The 286 Project says, who wins, Terence Crawford or Tommy Hearns? Depends on the weight. If it's at welterweight, I give Crawford a better chance. If it's 154, I'm picking Hearns. You got to remember, Hearns was 6'1", big frame. He eventually went all the way up to cruiserweight just to emphasize how big his frame was. And I think 154 was his best weight. He was lethal at 154. I'd definitely pick him over Crawford in that weight class. At welterweight, maybe Hearns will be sufficiently drained. You know, if you look at Hearns at welterweight, he wasn't as sharp as he was at 154 and up. Or let's say 154 and 160. He was a lot sharper in those weight classes and looked more coordinated because I guess he had a bit more muscle on him to give him more stability with his movement. At welterweight, he was good, but he wasn't what he would go on to become. So yeah, if it's 154, I'm definitely going Tommy Hearns. Welterweight, I might even still lean towards Hearns, but I give Terence Crawford a better shot. G-Man says, for me, Allen in the first Fisher bout almost looked like he didn't want to hurt Fisher. Hear me out. Fisher was way open to Allen's right hand, and you could see rather than throw to the head, he went to the body. All right, interesting take. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. Jelly Mold says, Gad with his way with words. Frotch confronted him about his brown nosing, and he still managed to worm his way out of it. Yeah, I saw that. Rod Brown says Dave Allen was at his heaviest for a fight, I believe. Claimed to have worked hard, but didn't trim. Cost him speed in the fight. Yeah, Dave Allen's one of those guys that always says he's trained hard and then gets in the ring fat, and after the fight, he admits that he didn't train. In fact, even after the Johnny Fisher fight, he said that he was only in half good shape and not really in proper good shape. So God knows what's going on there. Fight Sport Talk says, Johnny Nelson still calls Usyk an average southpaw. Can you believe this, Cloud? Yeah, I don't know what's going on there with Johnny Nelson. Maybe it's because Usyk doesn't do all the stuff that many of the fighters in the Winkerbank Ingle gym used to do, because Johnny Nelson himself, of course, was a southpaw, and they used to do like a lot of flashy stuff, switch hitting and, you know, leading with uppercuts and all this type of stuff, you know, like Prince Nassim, Junior Witter, Johnny Nelson, Harold Graham, obviously the one who invented the so-called Ingle style. It was really the Harold Graham style. So yeah, that generation. Also there was Ryan Rhodes. So that generation of Ingle fighters, they were flashy in a way that Usyk isn't. So maybe that's what Johnny Nelson's talking about. Because Johnny Nelson doesn't always articulate himself that well. He'll sometimes say things and I have to pause for a second and think, hang on, what exactly is he trying to say here? He's not the most articulate guy. So, yeah, it's sounds completely ridiculous when he says that Usyk is an ordinary southpaw. He's obviously not an ordinary fighter, but maybe he just means he's not flashy and unorthodox. Johnny Nelson might think that when a southpaw is unorthodox, it makes them more effective. Well, Tyson Fury's somewhat unorthodox, and he turned southpaw against Usyk. And in fact, did you notice that? In the Usyk-Fury rematch, whenever Fury turned southpaw, Usyk was able to hit him more easily. Did you notice? He was able to hit him more easily when Fury turned southpaw. So I think Johnny Nelson is way off with his assessment of Usyk as far as because he's not flashy, because he's not unorthodox. It means he's ordinary and therefore not as good as a flashy southpaw. Nah, he's better because his technique is so immaculate. And he's obviously got a great boxing brain. He's got great footwork. He's got a great chin, stamina, timing, discipline. It's all there. It's like Teddy Atlas said about Usyk. He's the complete fighter. There is no area in which Alexander Usyk is weak. Not one area. Literally solid in every single department. Not necessarily spectacular in every department, although he is spectacular in some. But he's at the very least, at a bare minimum, solid in every single department. Footwork, hand speed, punching power, box on the inside, box on the outside, good chin, good defense, so on and so forth. Jonas says, imagine a Talma versus Opatara at heavyweight. Yeah, somebody mentioned that in the live stream I did on my main channel the other day. A Talma versus Opatara at heavyweight. Wave says, Hatman, were you a fan of Prince Naz, or did you want him to be knocked out? No, I liked Prince Nassim. I thought he was very entertaining. I love watching him. I was definitely one of the people that was entertained by him. I didn't hate him or anything like that. I liked all the showboating and the big punching. Telstar says, to be fair, Usyk was flashy in the hook fight, so feels more just choice on Usyk's part. G-Man says, Johnny Nelson at his best was a decent cruiserweight, but if he'd been around in Usyk cruiserweight 2014 to 2018, he wouldn't have made top 10. Well, he certainly wouldn't have beaten Usyk. That's for sure. Anthony YouTube says, according to Tim Bradley, Usyk isn't an all-time great. Yeah, Tim Bradley's away with the fairies on that one. He's definitely away with the fairies. Usyk is an all-time great. Now, how highly you rank him in terms of the heavyweight all-time greats, again, I rank people mostly based on their resume rather than who I think they could beat in a fantasy matchup, because it's a more tangible thing to rank them based on resume. And obviously Usyk doesn't have a top 5 all-time heavyweight resume, at least not yet. And he might be too old to build one, but he's solidified as the greatest cruiserweight of all time. Nobody can dispute that. I don't think anyway. I think he's proven himself to be greater than Holyfield at cruiserweight. And I think you can make an argument to put him in the top 10 at heavyweight. He doesn't have a deep resume, but it's a strong one. And obviously, the better Daniel Dubois does in future, the better Usyk's win over him is going to look. You know, that win might age very, very well, depending on how Dubois' career turns out from here on in. Mura's man says, exactly, even Bradley calls Usyk basic, like all the flashy stuff matters. Bradley obviously looking more from the American style. Indeed. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of American fighters overlooked and didn't understand when the Eastern Europeans started coming into the pro game. They were looking at a lot of these Eastern European guys and they're like, oh, they look basic though. Well, they've learned the basics so well and they're so precise with the basics that you come in there with all your flashy stuff and they're punishing you to an extent that other flashy guys can't punish you. Do you know what I mean? And their positioning in the ring and the precision of their movement is incredible. And this is something that doesn't jump out to the untrained eye. Because again, American boxing, a lot of it anyway, is kind of flashy. Whereas the Eastern European guys drill the basics to the point where they're damn near perfect. Semi says, who will win Prime Usyk versus Opetaya? Usyk. Jonas says, I did notice that Usyk went for the 1-2 instantly when Fury turned southpaw. Yeah, when Fury turned southpaw, Usyk was able to hit him more easily. So he shut that switch hitting from Fury down real quick. G-Man says, James Tennyson will knock out Tank Davis. Johnny Nelson's saddest part was Tennyson. Oh, yeah, okay. James Tennyson's prediction that, yeah. Johnny Nelson's prediction that Tennyson would knock out Tank Davis. Yeah, Johnny Nelson's had some horrible predictions in the past. But that was like a company man prediction, wasn't it? He probably didn't even believe it. Jimbo Jones says that's why Usyk doesn't get the respect, because he just does the basics but amazingly. I think that's part of it. Another part of it is the fact that he's from Eastern Europe. He's not from a fashionable part of the world in terms of professional boxing. And thirdly, he's a cruiserweight. And there's always been this prejudice, with the exception of maybe David Haye, because David Haye came around in a very, very dull era for the heavyweight division. With the exception of David Haye, there's always been this kind of like prejudice against cruiserweights moving up to heavyweight. There's always this idea that they're not real heavyweights, they're not legitimate heavyweights, and therefore they shouldn't and they can't beat the top big men. When Holyfield moved up to heavyweight, it was a similar thing, you know. He was constantly being derided by the media, by the public, by other fighters. Oh, he's not a real heavyweight, he can't really punch, this, that, and the other. Yeah. When you move up to heavyweight, it's literally like, from cruiserweight, it's literally like you're stigmatized. It's always been that way. It's always been that way. Solid Snake says, why does Teddy Atlas always shout? I think he likes the sound of his own voice. That's probably why. You know, Teddy Atlas is all right in small doses for me. I do like a bit of Teddy Atlas in small doses. Wave says, thoughts on Ben Whittaker versus Cameron rematch beef with Warren and Shalom? Once Warren put that statement out, it's like he's trying to shame Shalom into taking the fight, and he's happy to do it on any network, but obviously Shalom would have to equal or better Warren's offer in order to get it on Sky. So, I don't know, man. It's a strange one. I think the fight probably could happen if Liam Cameron was willing to accept the money on offer from Ben Shalom. But, will he? I don't know. Where else is there for him to go if he doesn't accept Ben Shalom's offer? Because, again, Frank Warren made a counteroffer, which is more. Both fighters get paid more, according to Frank Warren, with the offer he made compared to the offer that Ben Shalom made. But obviously, going with Frank Warren's offer, the fight would be either on TNT or DAZN, because Frank Warren's TNT contract is about to come to an end in the next few months. But yeah, I think that Whittaker needs to take that fight. I think he needs to redeem his reputation. And the only way to do it right now is to take on Liam Cameron. And he's experienced enough as an amateur. He should be able to go in there and make the adjustments. If he can't, where's he really going to go as a pro? Fight Sport Talk says, I think Nelson is jealous. He said he would never beat Holyfield, but often downplays Usyk, who is far more skilled. Yeah, you could be right. Fight Sport Talk says, Opetaya versus Zerdo isn't happening next. Ramirez has a mandatory. Well, unifications trump mandatories with most of the sanctioning bodies anyway. Most of the sanctioning bodies will make an exception for a unification. They'll delay enforcing the mandatory if a unification is going to happen. So we'll see. Hopefully it is next. Hopefully Turkey El Sheikh gets his checkbook out and writes a big enough check that Zerdo Ramirez is unable to turn it down. Joe, bid your timing. Okay, interesting. Says, Hatman, do you think Hearn is near leaving boxing? He seems to not care about quality anymore, and his broadcast team just annoys me. Yeah, I suspect when the checks dry up for Hearn, he'll probably bow out. Maybe leave it to Frank Smith, and Frank Smith being somebody who, by his own admission, isn't really a hardcore boxing fan. He's a businessman at heart. I don't think Matchroom will last that long in boxing without Eddie Hearn. So, when AJ retires, how long will Eddie Hearn stay in the game? I'm not sure. Jai Opetaya might keep him in it for a little bit longer, depending on how long he can keep Opetaya's signature. Not like Opetaya's a big earner or anything, but they're building boxing in Australia. And Opetaya is definitely a very exciting fighter. A very exciting fighter. Fight Sport Talk says, Usyk is the greatest cruiserweight and his heavyweight resume is top 10. Joe says, also thoughts on broadcast teams nowadays. I, for one, cannot stand all the diversity-filled teams of them get away with knowing nothing about boxing. HBO had it best. Well, I've never really liked any UK broadcast team since Glenn McCrory and Ian Dark, Jim Watt, those guys, I like them. But since they left boxing, I haven't really liked any UK broadcast team. None of them. I can tolerate some of them, but in terms of liking them, no. My favorite UK broadcast team of all time was Ian Dark and Glenn McCrory. They were my favorite. Back in the days, you obviously had Jim Watt and Reg Gutteridge. They worked on ITV. They were a good duo. A lot of people like Harry Carpenter, but I think that's just nostalgia. I never thought he was, a particularly great commentator. But yeah, Jim Watt, Reg Gutteridge were great. I like them. And definitely Ian Dark and Glenn McCrory. But since those times, nah. And in terms of solo commentators, my favorite was a guy called Steve Holdsworth, who used to do commentary on Eurosport. He was hilarious. Because Eurosport was kind of a backwater, they allowed him to get away with a lot of stuff that maybe mainstream platforms wouldn't, even back then, wouldn't have allowed him to get away with. Because he was always like cracking jokes at the fighter's expense, and which was an American thing, really. A lot of American commentators back in the days would crack jokes about the fighters and whatever. Say a lot of cheeky stuff, which was funny and entertaining. And Steve Holdsworth on Eurosport used to do that all the time. He used to crack me right up. the way he was taking a mick out of the fighters. And Steve Holdsworth was a former fighter himself, a former amateur fighter. So, nobody can accuse him of being somebody that never laced up a pair of gloves, and how dare he make fun of fighters. Well, he was a fighter himself. Lefez says Dimitri Bivol, fundamental defense is impeccable. Chin always tucked. Leave one hand at home. Hands almost always up, etc. Yeah, he's an example of the incredible discipline and mastery of the basics that so many of these Eastern European fighters have, which is so underrated. It's like, if you learn the basics to that level, you don't need to be flashy. Yeah, the flashy stuff might look visually pleasing, but more often than not, it's not as effective as learning the basics very, very well. La Cosa Nostra Gaming says, I think Atama is going to absolutely dominate the next generation. Thoughts, Hatman? I'm not sure yet if he's going to absolutely dominate. I'm not sure yet. He's definitely very talented and he's going to be there or thereabouts. But we need to see him in certain situations first before I say he's going to absolutely dominate. Because there are some dangerous guys out there, particularly Bakadir Jalilov. Very, very dangerous. Shout out to Ocean Blue. Big up every time. G-Man says, what do you think TNT will do once Warren leaves? Will they stay in boxing, do you think? I hope so. Because the more the merrier. But who knows? They might bow out. We shall see. If they stay in boxing, they'll obviously need a promoter to replace Frank Warren. Who would that be? Ben Shalom's with Sky. Would he cross over and leave Sky and go to TNT instead? Would Sauerland take his show to TNT? Sauerland now these days is just doing Misfits, isn't he? He isn't doing anything else. So I don't know who would take that spot. The Zombie Dome says, I remember Malinaji, Frotch and Hay all together on a UK broadcast. Very nice team while it lasted. Yeah, they did a few times, but not regularly. So that's why I wouldn't really count them as a team, because they were only like an occasional team. Obviously, Malinaji did a lot of work with Sky. He was quite regular. But in terms of Malinaji, Frotch and Hay all together, as far as I remember anyway, it was quite rare. It was every now and then. Lefez says, the only commentator I like today is the guy who used to work for Showtime, who's always cracking jokes, but everyone else sucks. Yeah, he's all right on DAZN. That guy's actually all right. The guy you're talking about. Yeah, he's all right. But the rest of them suck. Darren Barker's terrible. What's the guy called? Mike Costello. He's terrible. Barry Jones, I mean, he's good sometimes, but other times he's annoying and he says silly things. You know, sometimes Barry Jones is, I get the impression, badly influenced by the people around him. It's like he performs down to the level of his co-commentators sometimes. When he's around better people, his commentary is better. Afro Jams his opinion on Cosell. Cosell was hilarious. Cosell was unintentionally hilarious as a commentator. So, yeah, I liked Cosell. You know, he had that weird voice or that weird way of talking. Howard Cosell. Down goes Fraser. Down goes Fraser. You know all that. Hilarious. Shout out to Afro Jam. Team says, we like to banter Eddie Hearn, but we got to admit that his run from 2014 to 2020 was legendary. Matchroom did put on some good shows on Sky, also helped to revive boxing in Britain. No question about it. Hearn's run was legendary. Hearn's run, that 5-6 year spell, was maybe the strongest run I've seen from a British promoter in my lifetime. Because he really did revive British boxing, and it was buzzing on a level that I've never seen it before. Obviously, you need the fighters to help you do that, and those fighters were the likes of Carl Froch and Anthony Joshua mainly, and many other fighters who were built around them. So yeah, that run that Hearn had was a tremendous run. But you know, sometimes the flame that burns brightest also burns the shortest. It doesn't last that long. Kind of like Mike Tyson as a fighter. He burned so bright, but he didn't burn for very long, did he? LeFez says, I actually like David Haye in commentary. So do I. I wish he'd do more of it. Yeah, Larry Merchant was hilarious. He was definitely hilarious. And I used to like Larry Merchant's monologues at the end of fights. He'd do these kind of like monologues where he'd come out with all these like metaphors and whatever. Now, towards the end of his HBO career, he started becoming a little senile. So his metaphors were slowly delivered. But in his prime, yeah, I liked Merchant's monologues at the end of fights. And his witty remarks during fights were funny. Pain Remains says, Hatman, have you heard of Leo Atang, another standout GB amateur heavyweight? I haven't. AK says, White versus Joyce would be interesting at this stage of their career. Who would you favor? I'd favor Joyce. I mean, White just went life and death with that Ghanaian guy who is allegedly in his 30s, but I swear to God, he must be closer to 50. And White went life and death with him. So I'd have to pick Joyce. Okay, we got a Luke Partridge fanboy here, still crying. We're not even talking about Luke Partridge. See, I did a video the other day talking about these weirdos who turn up on my videos. We're not even talking about Luke Partridge, and they start talking about him. God, you guys are so weird. You're still crying yourselves to sleep at night over the fact that Partridge got beat. You said he was going to destroy Usyk. He got beat twice. Send him to the block party. You guys are weird, man. We're not even talking about you guy. You turn up, oh, Fury. Get a grip, man. Get a life. The Cosa Nostra Gaming says, White versus Joyce is a good fight. These over-the-hill guys should be fighting each other if they don't retire. Put Wilder in with one of those guys too. White looks so poor against Tete. That's the guy's name, who I swear to God he must be 50. He looks so poor. His power appears to be diminished. I'm not overly excited about White fighting anyone at this stage, to be honest. After he got knocked out by Partridge, I was calling for White to retire, and I've seen nothing that he's done since to change my mind on that. Semi says, how do you think Daniel Dubois would cope in the 90s? I think he would have been a contender, a decent contender, maybe picked up a belt. Do I think he would have been the best? No. But he would have been in the mix for sure. Would have been in the mix. But there were some styles back then that I think would have been too much for him. You know, Lennox Lewis, maybe even Riddick Bowe. Although Riddick Bowe never fought any punchers, really. I mean, there was a couple punches like Gallotta was a decent puncher. Not a massive puncher, but a decent puncher. And Bowe got the stuffing beaten out of him in both Gallotta fights. And other than that, Bowe really never fought any punches. I mean, he did fight Jorge Luis Gonzalez, who could punch, but Gonzalez never landed anything on Bowe. But anyway, yeah, I think Dubois would have done fairly well, but I don't think he would have been, certainly not a top 3 guy in the 90s. Perhaps not even top 5. Maybe top 5 at a push at his absolute best on the right day. Lefez says Sergio Mora has an awful voice for commentary. He's just boring. I don't mind Mora myself. He's okay. He's okay. The Joker says Darren Barker really annoys me, but I can't put my finger on why. Yeah, he really annoys me as well, because he's just not very intelligent, you know? He's like a guy that is really not very bright, and then they put him on commentary, kind of like Spencer Oliver. In fact, I'm not sure who's less intelligent, Spencer Oliver or Darren Barker. It might actually be Darren Barker, you know. He might be a little bit less intelligent than Spencer Oliver, and that's saying something, because Spencer Oliver really is a bit of a village idiot, right? And that's the worst thing about Spencer Oliver, is that he's got so much to say for himself. Nothing worse than a dumb person with loads to say for themselves. But yeah, Spencer Oliver actually doesn't annoy me as much as Darren Barker. So yeah, there's something extra there with Barker. It's not just the fact that he's not that bright. There's something else about him that's annoying. It is annoying. Jimbo says George Foreman was a good commentator, although he said some questionable things, but always funny. Yeah, he said some very strange things, George Foreman. He was very hit and miss as a commentator for me. Sometimes he'd say stuff that'd have you scratching your head and you think, what? And that's why him and Merchant went back and forth so often, because Merchant would pull him up on some bizarre statements. You know? So Foreman was very hit and miss as a commentator. He'd say good things 1 minute and then bizarre things the next. The Joker says Todd Grisham is absolutely terrible. He knows nothing about any combat sport. He's always the main commentator at Glory Kickboxing as well. I have to disagree. I think Todd Grisham is actually all right. I don't mind him. I think he's got a much better commentary voice. I know that's not saying much, but I think he's got a much better commentary voice than any of the British guys on DAZN. And I think he's a much better lead commentator than Mike Costello. I'm glad that Todd Grisham is the lead commentator, or at least on the big shows, rather than Mike Costello, because he's way better than Costello. But, you know, to each his own. I don't think Todd Grisham is that bad. I think he's all right. Afro Jam says, I don't mind Corey Edman, or is it Erdman, as a commentator, but DAZN have him relegated to smaller shows. He is a Canadian, so he works with Eye of the Tiger and ESPN. I'm not sure if I am familiar with him. Maybe I've heard him, but didn't match the name to the voice. Fight Sport Talk says Hearn was hated when he was doing great by Wilder PBC cult, so he and his fanboys ignore when he actually does bad, like now. Afro Jam says Grisham comes from WWF originally, and that makes sense because he's got a good commentary voice. You know, with WWF, because it's such a bombastic form of entertainment, they want people whose voices stand out. They want people with bombastic voices. And I like commentators with bombastic voices. That's one of the things that is really lacking with British boxing commentators. Nobody has a bombastic voice. Afro Jam says Grisham and Mannix are a horrible team. They'll go down as some of the worst. Damn. I don't think they're that bad, to be honest. I think they're all right. I mean, Mannix says some stupid stuff, but, you know, overall, I find them far more agreeable, far more easy on the ear than the British commentators, the Barry Jones and Darren Barker and Costello. Luke Partridge says, did somebody say my name? The Joker says, I've heard from several people that the plan is for Wardley to fight Joyce at Portman Road in summer. Wardley's homecoming fight. They'll both fight a tune-up in March. I think I might have heard that somewhere as well. Luke Partridge says, I was raised to be a painter until my dad changed my last name to Fury. Please don't look for my birth chart. Or birth certificate, excuse me. Are Tyson Fury fans the worst? They might be the worst right now, but they're not the worst I've ever encountered in boxing. I've encountered worse. But in terms of right now, yeah, they're probably the worst. XMB45 says, no, I remember when Morris said, I know Floyd is not a southpaw, but he boxed like a southpaw when talking about Canelo struggling with southpaws. What a bizarre comment. I mean, for Mora to say that is bizarre. God knows what he meant by that. Was he saying that southpaws are normally very negative and they're counterpunchers and so Floyd fought? I don't know. Difficult to make sense of that one. Afro Jam says Bo beat Burt Cooper, who could punch. He actually used his height a little bit. Yeah, Bo beat him. George Foreman. Did George Foreman fight Burt Cooper? Actually, I don't think he did he? Fought Carwee. I don't remember if he fought Burt Cooper. Ray Mercer fought Burt Cooper. Why do I think that George Foreman might have fought Burt Cooper? Well, maybe he didn't. La Cosa Nostra Gaming says Jim Lampley needs to come back. He was the best. He still does commentary somewhere, doesn't he, Lampley? I think it's one of those online platforms. G-Man says Barker is very biased. Yeah, he is. Very biased. Indeed, G-Man. Costello is so bad, he's made people think Adam Smith is good. And I'm wondering whether Adam Smith will be a permanent fixture now on DAZN, because he did the commentary for the Usyk Fury rematch. He was the lead commentator on that. So I'm wondering whether he's going to be brought in as the lead commentator for many DAZN shows now. Oh dear, Christina Puncher. No, she's terrible. She does the commentary for Top Rank, right? She's terrible. Afro Jam says Grisham's knowledge is poor, but his delivery is great. The commentary in the Usyk versus Fury round 1. Usyk versus Fury 1, round 9 was great. Yeah, his delivery. He's got that good commentary voice. All right, peeps, I'm going to wrap this one up here. A shorter live stream than normal. I might switch in an hour or so to streaming on the main channel. We'll see. Got a few bits and bobs to take care of first. But thank you guys for hanging out with me here on the second channel. Gonna make this more regular so I can get this one monetized as well. All right, so you guys take care. And you might see me streaming on the main channel later on today, if not tomorrow. Yeah, I'm out.